Now, there's a lot of headlines around the future of powering our homes. We've got net zero. But actually, we kind of got stuff that can help us achieve that now. And I've got a panel of extraordinarily good-looking experts joining me here who are going to just, we're going to have a discussion about it. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how heated it's going to get, but that's the fun of doing these great debates. So I'm going to ask them one by one to introduce themselves, starting with the gentleman on my left.
So I'm Chris Burdett, the original inventor of PipeSnug.
PipeSnug, right. Okay, yes, Chris, thank you.
I'm Helen, Isherwood, Innovation Director at ADEY.
Hi, I'm Kimbo, Betty, and I do a bit of training on hydronics.
I'm Richard Burrows, and I'm Director of Mid Wales Plumbing and Heat Supplies.
And I'm Rob Whitney. I'm a Senior Product Manager at tepeo, which is a zero-emission boiler.
And can I just say, the way you're holding that microphone looks like you're about to burst into song. I'm loving it already. Now, look, panel, I'm going to start, actually, if I can, with you, Chris, because we met 4 years ago. You were on a thing called Installer Event, and you came up with this idea of PipeSnug, and it's like, well, will it make it, won't it make it? But you're here with a proper stall now, and you've made it, so to speak. How's it, well, I don't know, he hasn't retired yet, but how's that journey been for you?
Yeah, it's been great, actually. So we launched 2018 Installer. It's one of the original Installer event shows, I believe. And it was one of those, I feel was ahead of our time, really, about air tightness and where the industry's going now. And it's been great. We come back every year, and it's helped us build and make that important. We've been banging on about Part L, for instance, for 2 or 3 years now, and it's good to see it actually being brought up in conversation and people looking at what that is and what it means and what we need to do with it.
Brilliant. Well done. Congratulations, and long may it continue. And look, panel, I want to start with, look, as I said to you, and everybody knows who's been to these debates, I'm ignorant when it comes to all this stuff, okay? You guys are the experts. You folks are definitely the ones who are knowing what goes on. But it seems to me net zero gets bandied around in the press by government and so on as to got to achieve net zero by 2050, by 2030. I'm confused. What is net zero? What is it we're trying to achieve? And when are we trying to achieve it, and why are we trying to achieve it? I don't know who wants to pick that up, but I'm going to hand it over to you. Go on, just jump in, whoever wants it.
Yeah, I'll kick off. I mean, you get all sorts of terms bandied around. We're in a climate emergency. I don't think the world is acting as if we're in an emergency situation. So we've been an industrialised society for over 100 years. Have come a long way in terms of advancing society, people's quality of life, all this stuff. We've burnt lots of fossil fuels to get there. The result of burning fossil fuels is carbon dioxide emissions, which acts like a blanket of the Earth. And the Earth is getting hotter and hotter all the time. So it's globally recognised and proven now that we have to reduce the amount of emissions we're putting into the atmosphere. Otherwise, the Earth is going to become quickly uninhabitable. So net zero is all about, as soon as possible, really cutting back on the emissions that we're producing. That's the first part of it. So
emissions of what?
So carbon dioxide equivalent is the main thing. There are other global warming gases, but the main one that's recognised is CO2.
Right.
Methane is also a global warming gas. Okay. So we need to stop burning fossil fuels, so the gas and the coal and all the rest of it, and reduce all of our society, the emissions from everything from food, from transport, and from heating. And obviously, we're on a heating show, so that's why we're talking about this today. The net bit comes in as you can go so far in reducing your emissions.
Yep.
The rest of it needs to come from actually absorbing the carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere. And you'll hear things like carbon capture and storage. The target date is important because the sooner we really kill these emissions and cut back on them, the less the Earth is going to heat up and overheat. We're already seeing targets like 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees. What that means is that large parts of the world will become uninhabitable. And you're already seeing it in things like the weather changing.
Yeah, I mean, I read the other day, if you're lucky enough to go there, the Maldives Islands apparently will disappear in 50 years' time.
Yeah. So to be honest, they've been saying that for 25 years.
Well, yeah.
I was there 25 years ago, and they said it'll be gone in 10 years. And if you go there now, they'll still say the same thing.
Fair enough.
So I'm not sure if the Maldives use that for their
I
own
think that's the
tactical.
travel agent's ploy, isn't it?
Is it really?
believe
Wow,
so.
I can't believe. Well, so okay, sorry to interrupt you. Go on.
Very nice there, though.
Fair enough.
So we've got to stop burning stuff. We've got to stop using gas, turn over to electrification. So stop burning fuel in our cars. And really, that's what they show. You're seeing these changes happening already.
Yeah.
Boiler manufacturers are now heating manufacturers. They've got as many heat pumps on their stands as they do boilers. And I've recently joined a company that's developed a new type of boiler
Right.
that runs on electricity to store the electricity that's produced from wind farms. There's a crazy situation this year. The National Grid will be paying the wind farms at certain times of day to switch off, and it's called curtailment. And the National Grid will be paying these wind farms £1 billion not to produce clean electricity.
Why?
Now that's a mad missed
I mean, it's
opportunity.
just-
There's literally wind farms in our area. Just don't turn. It's nuts.
Yeah, well, I've seen that a lot, and you think, sure, it's windy. Why aren't these things spinning around and creating energy? I don't understand. Okay, explain why.
Because there's not enough demand aligned with it. So you've heard of like peaks and troughs in the grid.
Yep.
So assets like gas-fired power stations can turn up and turn down quite rapidly.
Right.
There's a great facility in North Wales called Norwich, which is a pumped storage, and that very quickly can introduce a hell of a lot of clean electricity into the grid, because the National Grid has to do a balancing act.
Yeah.
On the one hand, not have too much electricity in the grid, because then the frequency goes up and there's too much voltage. And on the other hand, you don't want to have not enough electricity, because then you get things like power cuts, the trains stop running, people's electricity at home
Hang on,
goes
the
off.
train stopped running anyway, so that.
Well,
makes
yeah,
no
we're
odds
doing
to
that
it.
in another way, aren't we? But
Sorry,
yeah, this
what,
whole
sorry, what,
balancing act.
the boilers, are they, do they use lithium?
No, it's a dry core thermal storage. So it's a kind of a ceramic block. Do you remember in the 80s we had night storage heaters? And they were a bit of a disaster. You know, you had to guess the next day how cold you were going to be and dial it in, and then you were overheated, all the rest of it. Well, those were a solution at the time to lots of nuclear electricity. Yeah? And so we needed the off-peak to absorb that base load electricity. Fast forward 30 years, we've got a different problem. There's 40 gigawatts of wind energy being built over the next decade. That energy is produced by the wind. Who controls the wind? Yeah, it's certainly not going to align with the demands of the national grid. So we need ways to absorb that excess when it's being produced, because the more clean energy we can harvest, the less gas we have to burn.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you. Kimbo, I know you've got a view on all of this, haven't you? I'd be interested for you to share that with us.
So I think this has become the biggest meal ticket the heating industry's ever had.
I totally agree with that.
It's a license to make money, and everybody's making money, which is great. But everybody's looking forward. We need to buy something new to solve this. And everybody in sales seems to have forgotten that we've got 22 million homes out there that are light years away from having any of this stuff installed. We need to be looking more at what we can do for the stock we've got at the moment. We need to be able to offer something that doesn't cost £15,000 that can reduce a substantial amount of energy wastage today. For ordinary people in ordinary houses, we need the government to support small changes or small investments that can make reasonably sized, cost-effective changes in the houses that we've got today. Because at the moment, if you go to the manufacturers and say, hey, all the stuff that you've sold in the last 15 years, what can we do to make this better? How can we make this be more efficient before you sell us something new to replace it? We won't get any help from the manufacturers because they want to sell new stuff, which is fine. But we need to be looking after the stock that we've got at the moment. We could start this tomorrow for a few £100 per household.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I get upset with it all.
Go on. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I don't think it even needs to be tomorrow. I think it is already happening. I think, there's lots of things that have been on the market actually for a long time to support improvements in efficiency. And really it's about how do we encourage people to know that those benefits are available to them. So if you went to the average person on the street, would they really understand that if they put some great insulation in their property, it could save them £500 off their bill? Would they know that if they put a filter into their system, then actually they might get 50% better output from a radiator. So those tools are there, and it's how we make use of them. And I think the whole renewables agenda is a perfect opportunity for us to try and use that as a basis to educate people, not only for the future, but for what they can do now.
It's interesting you say that, because I am the man in the street, so to speak. So, no, I didn't realise that. So, but how am I going to find that out? Because all I'm hearing is, you've got to wait for the technology, it's coming. And the conversation I had with someone yesterday here was, but I want to hold on because it'll be obsolete as soon as I get it, and the next one will be out cheaper and work better. So how do I find out? You were going to say something, Chris.
I've got particular. I've been in the building industry for over 30 years, and with all the new technologies coming out, it's great. But a lot of the problems is they're not installed correctly. People who own the houses don't know that they're not installed correctly, so they're not making the savings anyway. I mean, one of the things with our product, PipeSnug, especially around flues, people putting in a new boiler, which is meant to save them money, and they're leaving a great big hole around the flue and just watching hot air disappear out of the house. The problem, I think, starts with the fact that we need to educate the people who are having the work done of what the work is meant to look like and what it does, and then work back to everyone else.
So, Richard, installers don't know what they're doing.
I think that's a harsh statement, but
I'm praising.
I think we're in very challenging times. So I think ultimately there's always a trade-off between going out, doing a job, doing it at the right cost, the right price, but getting it right at the same time, and not always that same. It doesn't always fit in the same place, does it? No. Some customers just can't afford to upgrade systems. Some people can't afford to do the best thing that's out there. So what I always sort of recommend is kind of look at products and solutions that are affordable but can actually make the biggest changes and difference. So, I mean, I've got one little product here. So I'm just going to quickly go on to like balancing of heating systems. So I was involved in some research at Salford University back in 2020. And I was asked to go and set up the system there at the Energy House Salford. And what we found is that when we actually did the heat loss calculation on the property, we actually looked at the radiator systems, the circuit, the boiler, everything else, and it was a complete mess. So what I had to look at was products that actually go in, we could make a change there and get everything correct, and installers to have the easiest job doing that, because I took Kimbo up there actually. Kimbo might want to just
I'm sure he will
rock in here a little bit, but when we used basic level products like normal lock shields on radiators, when we used when we just chucked something in and we actually didn't set it up correctly, didn't use easy to use products to set that system up, what actually happened, we had massive, I think it was like 16%, wasn't it? We had energy wastage in that property. So it's quite massive stuff. So once you do the balancing, get the...
Go on.
Yeah, go on. So once you get the balancing in, you set the boiler up, get it actually working correct, so range rate in the appliance, actually doing the heat loss calculation, because without the heat loss calculation, we are just guessing.
Well, that's a critical point, isn't it? And how often does a heat loss calculation happen?
Very infrequently, and this is kind of...
It does come back to my point that actually it's not being done correctly by enough people, and if it was, it would make a hell of an impact straight away.
I always kind of think, do we actually take it away from the installer? Actually, do we get every single house in the UK heat loss calculated, so whenever the installer goes in, they know straight away what they're playing with?
So
again, I think they need to know what looks right and what should be done. It's not
is it feasible to do that? Sorry to interrupt.
Well, I don't think it's. I think it's not feasible not to do it, because if you don't do it, how do the installers know where to start? And if you don't know where to start, how can you set up radiators? How can you design a system? How can you get the right radiator sizes for the right outputs? How can you set the flow rates? It all comes from the heat loss calculation.
And as average man in the street, when I invite an installer into my house, I'm trusting them. Like I trust a doctor.
Yeah,
I mean,
100%.
it's just, because I don't know. Go on, Helen.
So you were asking about how do we spread the word of being able to do these things. And the installer ultimately is the person that is generally going to be the person that sees the homeowner.
Well, they're the
has-
manufacturer's salesman.
They really
everything.
are. And so actually I think the most important thing that manufacturers can do is actually support them to make sure that they do know how to do that stuff. And, you know, you just mentioned about how short of time they are. So, you know, expecting them to go on a day, and it just makes my mind boggle when you think of all these new technologies that are being introduced. How on earth does an engineer find time to go and do, you know, a day here, a day there?
And it's really significant as well. So the time actually to set up, it was a 7 radiator system, and to actually set the whole thing up and use the products that were there as fitted at Salford, it took considerable amount of time. So we were talking 8 hours to actually get the system correct and set up. And no one's allowing for that sort of timescales at the end of a job to actually get the commissioning of that boiler done correctly. And it's kind of things like this. So this is an auto balance TRV that's just been bought out by Drayton.
We'll see if we can get a little bit of a zoom in on that.
A bit of that.
Zav, well done. Yes.
So that there is the new auto balance and TRV that Drayton have just released. So products like this help speed up the commissioning process of a heating system. So without products like this, so this is one of many products, but ultimately it comes from manufacturer level. So when we went to Drayton, so we talked to Drayton, and we mentioned that if they had this product, how quickly it would speed up the balancing process.
Right.
So they listened and they brought out a product. So and it's just out now, and this will actually speed up commissioning time. If you were to go around every single radiator, obviously you still need to know what the output of the radiator is.
Yeah.
So we can't get away from heat loss calculations. That's still a given. But this will speed up commissioning time by a fraction. You'd probably be, if you knew the actual output of all the radiators, you could go around an 8 radiator circuit probably in, I don't know, an hour and a half, something like that, and actually commission the system fully.
The
So
tricky-
making it efficient.
So yeah, so ultimately if you
Sorry,
get the
Helen.
correct flow rates through the radiators, you've got the correct output out of the radiators, you've got the correct delta T's going back to the boiler, so you've got the actual boilers running in condensing mode a lot more, and that's really, really key to achieve that.
Helen, yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is some of the things that we will talk to installers about, that we can give them tools like water testing, we can give them tools to make their job easier, but the problem is you get the installers that want to do the great job, but they put their quote in and they're at a different price level, and so the things you're describing are all going to help, but they're going to be on site longer, and therefore how do they compete? So this is where we need some sort of regulation or support, so we create kind of a ground
totally agree with that.
leveling.
100%.
Everyone knows what needs to be done, but I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, Kimbo, because you're dealing with the grassroots of this. But to me, I think training is so underfunded. You know, you go to college. I went to college. I was a bricklayer by trade. You come out of it. No one teaches me how to run a business. No one teaches me about the effects of me not doing my job right. They just teach me how to lay bricks and you go on site. Now, heating engineers are generally one of the smarter trainees out there. They've got a lot more to learn. It's a lot more technical. But also, there's not enough that goes into training. Possibly that should come from the larger companies. But there needs to be a generic rule book that everyone's working to achieve. You know, if you go into Australia, it's a 4-year course for bricklaying, not 3-year. We're so far behind on the training through lack of funding. I think that's what's actually killing the industry.
So whose responsibility is that then?
For the the funding.
To get
It's-
going earlier.
I don't-
You know, today, for instance, it's apprentice and student day here at the show. So it's a great opportunity, isn't it, to grab some of these people and talk to them about it?
It is. I mean, but it needs to be into the colleges. You know, the colleges are so underfunded now. I mean, our local college in Luton, it's literally closing down. They can't get people through the door. And the ones that are going through the door, using it as a hobby. You know, this is meant to be the future of our industry. We're coming out of all this technology and nobody's really got the basic training to do anything with it. And until we change that, we can bring out all these amazing inventions, but it's still going to end up that we're not going to make this net zero.
Yeah, ultimately, there is a section where, you know, we were discussing this last night, actually. We did a little forum with Drayton, and we discussed it around the panel. And ultimately, what's missing is actually there's lots of funding out there for getting across to net zero, or whatever net zero means, but there's funding for it, but it's targeted at heat pumps. If some of that funding was diverted to actually...
So it's too much concentrated on heat pumps.
Definitely.
Right.
If
It's
it was
a
just-
buzzword, and that's
yeah,
why
yeah.
everyone jumps on it.
And the problem is that jumping on is going to actually, if it's about carbon savings, there's lots of carbon savings to be made by implementing other innovative products on the market. So why put all the funding across to that when there's actually products right here, right now that we can implement and install and actually make instant efficiency savings on all heating systems?
It's not just
Helen, I'll bring you in
products.
a minute.
You know, there's all this talk and everyone's here today trying to sell something, isn't there?
Yeah.
But just doing things to the best practice standard and actually doing a commissioning and tuning activity on a system, I think the industry and the gas boiler industry is a kind of a victim of its own success in a way, because the products have become so powerful and so easy to install that the tuning and commissioning has kind of got forgotten about.
So, Rob, don't ask you, do the best practice standards need to change?
Well, the best practices have existed for many years.
Kimbo's going, so?
But they've not been educated, you know, the systems have not been talked about.
Right.
And
Because they're based on older technology and systems, aren't they?
not really, it's all about raising the bar to the highest level. And,
Right.
and what we see a lot of the time is things are done to a minimum standard, not a best practice.
Okay, that makes sense. You were going to jump in, Kimbo.
Well-
Helen, I promise I'll bring you in a sec. Okay, you go on, jump in there.
Yeah. So I think there is lots of training around. If you look across the manufacturers, there's loads of content. I think often people don't know how to access it, or it's long. So, you know, actually you want a minute on YouTube to tell you how to do something now. You don't want to spend half a day when you could be out working.
Yeah, no one wants to watch long videos.
So I think that part of this is that we need to switch the way that we make the content available and make it easier for people to access. But actually, we need to get more people into the industry. I think we're going to struggle.
Oh, well, that's another issue, isn't it? That's for another debate, maybe. But yeah, Kimbo, what's your view? I know you'll have one.
So I don't think we need more people. I think we need more training. We need less people that know how to do it properly, rather than lots of people that are just throwing in boilers and heat pumps left, right, and centre. If you go back
surely,
to
if you have more people, well trained, it would be an easier job, wouldn't it?
It's the more people well trained.
it's the more people well trained.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
that's
I mean,
it,
at our local college in Northampton, when they're short of seats, I only know this because my wife's in the teaching industry. When they're short of seats, they lower the standard for plumbers, for plasterers and bricklayers. As long as they can breathe and sign their name, they're going to get a place. And we need to raise the standard. This is a high-tech job that installers are doing now. It's not just about
well, let's
soldering
face it,
and
it's
doing
about
that sort of stuff.
safety in people's houses.
Well,
Ultimately,
it's
isn't
more
it?
than that, isn't it?
Well, it's a small element.
That's a small element of it.
Yeah.
But this is
Not for the homeowner, it isn't, though.
No, true. I mean, gas safety is paramount, but ultimately, you know, the homeowner wants to save money as well. So if they knew the difference
Yes.
between an installer going in
And-
and then doing it wrong and costing them 20% on their annual fuel bills versus someone actually going in, setting it up, commissioning it, and saving them 200, 400, 600 quid a year.
So that leads me into the question, do the consumers care, or do they just want the quickest and easiest job?
I think they'd care if they knew.
If they knew. That's
you have
three big
different
words.
types of consumers as well. You've got landlords that don't care, and then you've got someone who's just bought a new house, aims to live in it for the next 20 years,
Yeah.
who does care. But I think this idea of divvying up small amounts of money now, this idea Richard had about getting every household heat loss checked. I mean, that's actually not a bad idea at all. I mean, that would cost, I don't know, £100 a head. Instead of giving, you know, you've got to spend £15,000 to get a £5,000 grant. Why not get every house at £100 done? So as you say, we go in there, we know exactly what we're up against. Because you can't set the flow rates if you don't know the heat
We need
loss.
someone from the
They're
government
not
here.
plugging the holes, are they? You can put a heat pump in,
Yeah.
but if you've got no insulation in the loft, you ain't doing the bloody
That's
thing
right.
anyway.
Actually, on that
But
point-
that's somebody else's job.
On that point, how important is insulation? I mean, it's a stupid question, really, but how important is insulation to all of this?
Massive.
In what way? Because there's
to
a
efficiency
couple of
and- okay.
aspects of this. Is on the one hand there's efficiency, and on the other hand there's cost. And,
Yeah.
and I don't think consumers care about efficiency.
Are they not part of the same equation?
They
though?
don't understand what efficiency means.
Right.
But they do understand pounds and pence. They
Yeah.
understand that their combined gas and electricity dual fuel bill
Yeah.
is rising from £1,500 to £3,000.
Yeah.
So now they've got a good reason to care. They've got a good reason to care that their system is being installed
So
in the
this is a
optimal
great
way.
opportunity, actually. I mean,
It's a huge opportunity.
I mean, unfortunately, we've got this opportunity coming along where fuel bills are going to go through the roof, ironically, but it just, you know, probably a lot with the heaters as well. But, you know, this is a great opportunity to educate. Helen, you were going to jump in, I think, and say something.
Just going to say, I think, insulation, it should be the starting point on any of the work that we're doing, but obviously it's usually costly, prohibitive for a lot of people because funding is available, but not for everyone. And actually, you know, and you're talking about, do we go in and we check every home, but what's the outcome of that? So, yeah, you go in and you check that, but as a homeowner, you discover actually, yeah, you should be insulating your property. That's a shed load of money. And at the moment, do you want to spend your money on that, or do you want to go on a nice holiday? So somewhere there needs to be some further incentives to get everyone to do that.
Well, if we rewind 10 years, we were very, very good at fitting insulation. And then all of a sudden, eco came along, and instead of fitting insulation, we fitted boilers and thermostats. So we need to kind of go back to the future in a way on that. But, I mean, there's other things you can do to reduce costs. As already been discussed about, you know, setting systems up, actually fitting thermostats where they don't exist, turning them down, having zoning. All of these technologies have been developed over the last 15 years, and it's only now that they're really getting recognised. So there's so much that can be done to save customers money on their bills.
Helen.
It comes back again to education, doesn't it? It's training for installers to be able to do the whole job properly. But actually it's then awareness for homeowners to understand what the benefits are to them. And I agree with you, in the end it comes down to, you know, if you do this and you do that, and it's a simple, you know, it's something as simple as good water treatment, or, because insulation's a big project, but you do all that stuff, and incrementally you could be saving 600 quid or so off your heating bills. So that's then appealing to a homeowner. But they need to know about it.
There needs to be a bit more flexibility with insulation, though, because, you know, there's homes out there very hard to insulate and very hard to heat as well.
When you look at a lot of the older buildings.
So there's a bit of a, you know, well, not just that, but you've also got like listed buildings as well. So
That's
how do we ever insulate those?
Yeah.
Because if the government's policy is that we don't,
Can't touch them,
we
can't
can't
do
touch
anything.
them, can't do anything.
Well,
How do
they
you
actually
do that?
insulate a lot of them on the inside now in London.
Yeah, I mean-
they're going to do EWR on the outside and
Yeah.
they do insulated on the inside.
Yeah.
And they said, there's no real excuse, I think, that we can keep diverting money to new technologies, but it still comes down to the same problem. If you just plug in holes, and if you don't concentrate on insulating them homes and making the
And
small
air
differences,
tightness.
it doesn't matter what you put
It
in there.
sounds
It
to
ain't
me
going
as
to
though
do anything.
insulation is where it should start. I mean,
Well,
really.
insulation's key, but because I mean, what happens with insulation is obviously if we go out tomorrow, we put a heat pump in. Okay, say it's a 16 kilowatt heat pump, but then you insulate the property and then you get it down to like 5 kilowatts. The problem is that 16 kilowatt heat pump, which is government funded, etc., that now is oversized quite dramatically, and now that's going to run inefficiently and not at the coefficients of performance that it was targeted at. So if we don't do the insulation thing first, then that's a really big problem for the equipment that's being fitted right now, because that's happening. Lots of equipment's going out there being fitted right now, and the homes still need further insulation. So
I think if you look at the question that we started today's session with, for me it's always about you can't eat an elephant whole. So actually for every home you need to decide what the best thing is for that home depending on the nature of that property and where they are and what their budget is. But it's making sure that our installers understand what the options are so they can consult in the right way.
Well, the reason why insulation really matters is actually the flow temperature. So to allow renewable technologies to run at the lower flow temperatures and gas boilers to be efficient as well, the lower you can have the flow temperature from the appliance, the better. So that's why insulation kind of matters, because if you don't have enough insulation, the radiators need to be increased in size. So that's really the reason why insulation matters. But there are technologies out now. I work for a manufacturer of such a technology where the flow temperature isn't so key to efficiency. So with a heat pump, it's absolutely related that if you can get your flow temperature down to 30 to 40 degrees, that's what you need to get heat pumps running efficiently. With a zero-emission boiler, which mimics the operation of a traditional gas boiler, very happy running at 60 degrees with no impact on efficiency. So it is horses for courses. There's no one-size-fits-all. Everyone's banging on about heat pumps as if they're like the perfect solution.
No silver
They're
bullet.
not for every home.
Yeah. Interesting. Has anybody got any questions or comments they'd like to ask while we've got this panel here? 'Cause if not, we'll carry on. So, question I've put to most of our panels actually as we move through this: the awareness via age groups, if you like. My son, who's 32, lives in Canada, is hugely aware, eco-aware and so on. Is there a disparity here in terms of the older the people? They, you know, I don't want to put one of these things in, it's going to cost me a fortune. I don't even know if I'm going to get the benefit for how long. Are we seeing anything like that? I mean, there's a manufacturer.
I don't think it's an age thing. It's people's attitude. So some of the most eco-aware people I know are retired. Okay.
Right.
They've got the EVs. They've got a house covered in solar panels. They've got heat pumps or they've got zero-emission boilers.
Right.
And it's not an age thing. It is almost a bit of a luxury that the people that are more affluent can actually spend the money in these new technologies. What we need are technologies that are clean and accessible at the same time.
Affordability is key, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And so how can you go on, Rich?
I was going to say, myself and Rob were down, and Kimbo actually, we were down at Fully Charged show down in Farnborough several weeks ago. And it's definitely not an age thing, because a lot of the people come in, and we were actually on the energy advice team. So we had a lot of, there was young people actually, it was definitely younger generations coming in, but there was obviously a lot of older generations as well coming in asking questions. You know, what should we do to our homes? What's the best thing to do? Do I go for PV? Do I go for solar panels? Do I go for this? Do I go for that? And my advice was actually look at the system you've got already, do everything you can do on the system you've got, and then look at everything else beyond that as a bonus, because everything you can do, obviously anything we can do to make things more efficient and reduce and increase the energy efficiency of our homes, if it doesn't matter whether it costs 10 quid or whether it costs £15,000, you start with the small measures and go from there. Or that's always how my brain gears up.
I think we've got to start with the fabric of the house. I think, because I work across both industries, so I'm more of a builder. Obviously, I've ended up dealing with the heating industry through PipeSnug. And they don't really work together. The Part L and the British standards contradict themselves on many things. And you've got to start with the fabric of the house before you even touch the heating, because, again, it won't make a difference. And that, I think, is so important and keeps getting missed over and over and over again.
It seems so basic and
it's so
some of the
basic.
problems are, though, is the insulation is obviously quite key, and I get that. I live in a nearly airtight house, so I get the insulation is key, right? So, but the issue is, if we're putting a boiler in now, and then are we going to put it in with just basic lock shields, not balance it, not set the boiler up, just walk away, or can we put it in with other little products that maybe only add a couple £100 to the total sum of the bill, but actually then reduce the homeowner's bill year on year, 16%, 20%, whatever it could be. But or do we just walk away, give them a basic spec and not bother? I don't know, because to me, like the insulation, the heat pumps, everything else, it's just a massive step and a big chunk of money, when actually you could spend on the smaller stuff and actually have some sort of energy benefit.
But shouldn't new builds have... I'm sorry, go on.
Well, I think as well we've got to keep it real, because all this focus is going on new build, but the reality is that about 80% of the properties we'll be living in 2050 are actually already built. So really the focus and the investment should be going on those existing properties and how we get the most out of those. And then absolutely it's a no-brainer that anything new gets built in the best way it can be.
And it
But we're not.
But we're
so
not. My question, therefore, is should that be mandated that actually new builds must be?
Well, the problem is we're building houses right now that aren't net zero homes.
That's what I mean.
So when we're in that predicament and the house builders have the power to overrule government and guidelines, I don't get it.
So we should have been fitting net zero homes in 2016.
Yeah,
right?
no,
the gas boilers were going to be banned in 2016. The Code for Sustainable Homes. The then government scrapped it.
And that's another issue, isn't it? Because if you get a new government in, and we might, who knows? I'm not going political, but then...
I try not to.
Yeah, no, exactly. But who knows what they'll do? I mean, it's just nuts, really, in a way. Kimbo, go on. You were going to...
So yeah, the design of our boilers hasn't really kept up with the design of modern houses either. Average modern house is 5 or 6 kilowatts. If you look at the cheap and cheerful boiler, they've got a minimum output of perhaps 6, 7, even 8 kilowatts. So these boilers come out of the box, they go onto the wall, and they're never ever going to do anything but cycle. They're going to cycle their entire life. If you look at the flow and return temperatures that we need to achieve, they're never going to condense. And there's 500 of those going to be signed off today. There's 500 of those signed off every single day. They're
You,
fitted with.
you see them all the time, don't you, Kimbo?
I see them all the time.
Letterbox, we go in the houses, isn't it? Letterbox shaped radiators.
Yeah, radiators that the ladies kick off about because they look silly underneath the window. We're using plastic pipe work. With
Not just the ladies, I think the men too.
It's usually the ladies, because I'm not bothered about radiators, really.
With good reason, I would say.
Indeed, yes. But I mean, even down to, if you look at the cost of upgrading the 10 mil pipe that house builders use at the moment to 15 mil pipe. I mean, how much would that cost per house? 50 quid, I don't know, next to nothing. But because they won't spend that 50 quid and they're not forced to spend that 50 quid, all of that pipe work's got to be taken out in a few years when we go down the heat pump route. So we're building new houses today where the boilers don't condense, they cycle all day, and they're not future-proofed. Where's the sense? It's lunacy, isn't it? Can anyone tell me that's not absolutely crazy? And it's happening today. There's 500 houses today going to be signed off with boilers that don't condense and don't modulate.
Well, even worse than that, Kim, is that we've gone away from systems with cylinders to installing homes without cylinders. And if we're looking to the future of having a system where we can absorb this excess renewables, you need storage. You need hot water cylinders, you need phase change batteries, you need thermal storage boilers like the tepeo unit. Because it is utterly crazy that we are knowingly still building new builds that will need a retrofit to hit net zero.
It's lunacy.
It is lunacy.
Everything right now will need a retrofit.
It's also massively frustrating. So the new Part L, that's been in consultation for years. So the new build knew it was coming. They can't say they didn't know it was coming. Yeah, oh, look at that, and now we need. And so because of the way it's done, actually, they've got till 2023 to start using it and implementing it. Now, to be fair, on water treatment, we are seeing most of the new build are starting to implement that now and aren't waiting. So it's not all bad, but actually it does give people an excuse. So when they put these regulations in, it shouldn't wait then and give them extra time at the end. So because it's just dragging it out.
It's very frustrating, I agree. I mean, I've recently changed roles. I've gone to a startup business. I was previously at a big corporate organisation for nearly 15 years. And the last role I had on that was working with the manufacturers groups, working with the government to help write and update building regs. And we know that things all have to change for 2025, which is when gas is banned in new builds. But the regs that have coming into force this year, this summer, were a real fight to get to where they are, and they're only halfway.
I was going to say,
new Part L.
Yeah.
They come in last week, didn't they, for new build?
It did.
Did you ever see the original draft? The original draft.
Yeah.
What they released was so watered down from the original draft. They had over 3,000 people write in and say it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And when they released it, it was less than what the draft was.
Well,
it was shocking. I mean, one of the biggest problems that we see is cement. So it takes 80% of the carbon footprint in construction is from cement.
Yeah.
Why are we still pointing around holes? That's what we can't get round with our product. Why are people still using this? They want to live in a carbon-free home and a carbon-free society, and yet every person on the planet accounts 10% of their carbon footprint is to do with concrete and cement. Yeah. It should be completely written out. We don't even need it anymore. We can build everything modular. It's madness.
What would you like to see from the government and the industry at large to make all of this happen? Because it seems to me it is lunacy, this whole thing. It's such an easy, obvious thing, and yet
somehow we've got to stop the lobbyists getting their way. Yeah, the lobbyists get their way. I mean, if you look at the motor trade, the regulations come from up high, and they say to the car manufacturers, right, as from January the 1st next year, if it's not this clean, you can't sell your cars.
Yeah, but we were told to buy diesel cars 10 years ago.
I get that, but someone up there is making sure that every year things get better and better. We're forcing the car manufacturers to be cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, and then we somehow dropped electric motors on them as well. Yeah,
the mining of lithium's a whole different story as well.
Yeah, but they've achieved it. They've been forced to do that. The heating industry hasn't been forced to do anything.
So they need to be forced.
Yeah, they need to be forced. They don't need to be suggesting themselves what should be done, because they're going to do it looking after their interests, which is seemingly what's happening.
Helen, you look pensive.
Yeah, I think just from a practical, because obviously we're always going to say that more can be done, but from a water treatment, Part L updates are an improvement in terms of enforcing better water treatment in properties, making sure that filters are fitted and they're cleaned. And that is actually a good step forward. And actually for installers it's good because they've got a level playing field, because then when they go in and quote, they are going in and they're not trying to do something the next person isn't. But the problem is it's still very focused on new build. There's a slight move towards existing, but actually if we want to go further, we want to not only be thinking about ahead, we want to be thinking about what about those existing systems that are being, tweaked or updated or serviced. And at the moment, there's nothing really to control that.
The retrofit is the big challenge. So if you look at how many homes there are, bear in mind we're also adding into the problem with the new builds that will need a retrofit. If we're going to hit this in time to stop the world overheating, we've got 30 million homes that need to be retrofit, yeah? And we've got probably 30 years to do it. So we need to get on with it, don't we?
It's not going to happen.
We need to get on with it. But we need to make it happen. And there's such an inertia in the industry with the established companies and the house builders. We need companies to come in and disrupt the industry, and also for the consumers to drive this. The sort of customers that we're talking to, they're talking to us because they don't want a gas boiler anymore. Yeah?
But I think this is the other area that I would like to see the government do more on, and that is the education piece. So incentivising engineers to go and do training and upgrade their own skills. But actually the government really needs to step in and do some communication to homeowners.
Okay, so how do we get the government to do that?
Well, you vote for a government that's green.
But that's not going to happen, really, is it? I mean, sadly, you're right, but it's not going to happen in the next election, in the next 2 years.
The current government was elected on a net zero policy, yeah?
I think it needs to start.
Partially.
I think training needs to start again. I think we need to get right back to grassroots. I think we should pump the money that we're diverting to new technologies and actually start putting into training right at the beginning. 16-year-olds coming through, doing a longer course, putting another year on it, and properly training with refreshers every year, and having an industry standard. So when these people are then going out on site and quoting against each other, they're all quoting for the same work. So they're quoting for all the same technology that's going into the houses. So it's a fair and level playing field for both the installer, for the people making the products, and the homeowner, because they know what they're getting. Everyone's quoting on the same thing. At the moment, if you take 3 quotes, you'll get 3 completely different systems.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And what do we do with the government? Well, God knows where the government's going to go in the next year or in the next 10 years. There'll be always different governments with different ideas.
Well, it's going to be what's popular.
Yeah, so I think
What's gonna get me a
ultimately
vote?
you can't wait for that. You've got to, it's really down to manufacturers to do their part in influencing change and doing it at the grassroots level rather than waiting for
I
that.
think we need to simplify things as well, though, because we could keep talking about training and all these innovations and stuff. If the installers need to learn about all these new things, so say they take 5 new products in, that's like a week's worth of training every year.
Yeah, I was going to say actually,
it's crazy.
It's quite specialist, the training, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is. Because your college course. I'm an apprentice, so my apprenticeship covered all the aspects in my job role. But actually, once you finish the core apprenticeship, then you were specialised in your areas. And it's very much like that in our industry. Like heating is very specialist, whether we like to think that or not. Actually, throwing a boiler on the wall is fine. Everyone can do that. Everyone can pipe it up. Everyone can get everything hot. But ultimately, getting the most out of that boiler is very specialist, and the products that surround it are very specialist as well. Unless the manufacturers or the government or whoever, policy and police, to make those boiler install standards to the same standard throughout. So the product might vary very slightly, but it has to achieve the same performance variables. Then it might all improve, but that's very specialist.
Yeah, I think the HHIC digital benchmark app is a step towards that, because it does mean that people have to go through a process and sign up, but it's only a start.
Yeah, the only problem I always think with it is who polices it, because who polices everything right now and who's policed everything for the last 20 years?
It's too many organisations, I think, anyway. I think we just need one organisation. It can be policed. It should be a group of people who can go around. If you're having a boiler done or something like that, they go around and they tell the end user or the customer, this is what you need. You pay them a fee. You get a printout, you get everything you need as a customer to then get quotes based on what you receive, which is sound advice on the right system for your house.
And ultimately, that's what I said about the heat loss calculation. Wouldn't it be fantastic if one person or an organisation is set up that goes around each and every single house?
Totally agree.
I'm in.
This is
Let's set a business up.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Dragon's Den.
This
Yeah,
is
go on.
what you need. This is the kilowatt out. This is what the home needs energy wise, and these are the products that
I'd like to make you an offer.
I've got a fiver in my pocket. Should we start there?
It's a start. It's a start. Let me ask you a final question, if I may. And I'm sorry, I just realised, Kimbo, you're getting tickled by our jungle behind you there.
Quite pleasant,
It's quite pleasant. All right. Well,
I thought it was his new hairstyle, but
The most romance I've had in a long time.
so look, what do we say? This is quite a big question, I suppose. But starting with you, Rob, if I may, and moving around. Looking forward over the next 12 months. I'd love to invite you all back in 12 months' time, actually, to see where we've got to, if anything's changed, or what do you see as the biggest challenge going forward?
The biggest challenge is really stability in regulations from the government. So obviously we've just come out of a pandemic and there were various schemes that were put in to try and stimulate the industry. We've seen the end of the RHI and the start of the boiler upgrade scheme. There was the Green Homes Grant and all these things. Installers can't keep up. And these schemes are so ill thought through and not prepared that the government isn't listening to the industry. What we need is some stability, a level playing field for the emerging technologies to come out and be successful on a level playing field. That's really what we need. It's almost like the less the government tries to involve itself in, the better things will be.
Funny that. Rich.
I think ultimately the problems we've got at the moment is that everything the government throws at everything we've had in the past just doesn't work. So going forwards, we really need to focus on actually what we're trying to achieve with existing stock and new build stock, and make a very big differentiator between the two, and then fund both cases rather than just fund one case like a heat pump change or new builds to do this. Let's have a think about actually the retrofit market, what we can do in that place, and the sort of energy savings that we can make in that arena alone.
Kimbo.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm bound to say this, but I think it's got to be training, because no matter what the governments do or don't do, what schemes they do or don't put in place and how successful they are, if you haven't got trained staff that can go and actually do the right job on site, doesn't matter how many schemes there are. I mean, some of the schemes at the moment are you take off a perfectly good boiler and you refit it with another boiler that's just the same. And I mean, there's no sense in that either. But I think if engineers can rock up to any house and understand heating, understand flow, they'll be able to make their own assessments. They won't need particularly grants and incentives and all the rest of it. But at the moment, we're incentive driven. It's all about profit. And I know we've all got to earn a living. I get that. But we need, especially with what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, it's going to get worse. We've got a moral obligation as engineers to step up. This is our time. We're going to have less and less gas coming. It's not going to be controlled, I think, like the government originally thought it was going to be. Some of these countries in Europe, they just had their gas cut off.
That's a good point.
And I'm waiting for Jeremy Clarkson to step up and say, I'm ripping out all the nonsense in my farm and I'm growing wheat as from tomorrow, because there's going to be a national shortage, there'll be a worldwide shortage of wheat. So we need to look at the bigger picture as well with all of it. It's not just about, the last year and this year. Heaven only knows where the Ukraine thing's going, but that's going to be a real effect in the next year or so, I'm sure.
Yeah. Fair enough. Helen.
I agree with everything that's been said so far. I guess the thing is we need some decisions to be made. So there's still a big question about where hydrogen's going to fit into this story.
Yep.
And actually, meanwhile, this means that most of the manufacturers are currently having to back lots of different technologies, which is a huge investment for everyone to be making. And I just think in the long run, that cost somewhere is going to have to get passed on, all this investment. And we're going to end up in the same kind of VHS Betamax thing, where some of the technologies in the end will go and some of them will stay. But as a homeowner and an installer, you want to know what you're backing, because if I was the installer, how do I choose where I'm going to focus my team's training on?
Great
how
point.
am I going to decide which I'm going to offer to my homeowners? because actually it'll be me that's going back in 10 years' time and servicing them. So I just would like us to get to sort of decision of how we're going to progress.
Thank you. And any youngsters out there who are not sure what VHS and Betamax are, it's what we used to record our television programmes on. Can I ask you, do you do karaoke regularly? Because you're the best microphone holder we've had on any of the panels so far. So thank you for your input. Chris, last word with you.
Again, all great points. For me, I think we just need to strip it back to the basics. I think
Back
we
to
need
basics. Where have we heard that?
back to
No,
basics. I think we need to be more responsible. I think we need to stop chasing buzzwords. I think the government needs to stop putting money in places it's not really needed, and perhaps put it in places where people can understand what's needed. I think letting homeowners know and making an easy, accessible platform for them to know what needs to be done in their house, so they can then police any installs they have. I think that would be great money spent. Back into education, with the training, make the training longer, have incentives to go back for a week every year for plumbers, maybe a tax rebate or something so everyone keeps kept up to the date. But the main thing is responsibility, build back better. If you're putting something in, make sure it's better than what you're taking out. And I think if everybody does that, we might have a chance.
Brilliant. Look, Chris, Helen, Kimbo, Richard and Rob, thank you for joining us. I know our topic was what have we got now, but actually we moved on from that a little bit, and I think it's a really good discussion, and I really appreciate you being here with us. So thank you very much for that. Please give them a round of applause to our panel for a great session.